Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello and welcome to another episode of WilmsFront. The date is Wednesday, the 30th of October 2019 at 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. I'll introduce my in-studio guests in a moment, but I just first want to talk about what's in the news this past 24 hours. Obviously, in the UK, their parliament has been dysfunctional, with it refusing to either pass a Brexit deal or hold an election to let the people decide if they want to elect pro-Brexit parties or pro-Remain parties. Well, finally, Boris Johnson, the Conservative Prime Minister, has been able to get the House of Commons to pass a bill that will call an early election for Thursday, the 12th of December 2019. It will be a four-corner contest between the pro-Brexit parties, the Conservatives, and of course Nigel Farage's Brexit Party. Then on the Remain side, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party and Joe Swindon's Liberal Democrats, which explicitly want to cancel Brexit. Of course, down here in Melbourne, there's yet been another disruptive socialist alternative rally outside the International Mining and Resources Conference. It's in its third day now. Police have had to use a lot of force to keep them from blocking the entrance. There's been horses, police assaulted, and there've also been attendees being spat on. There's been, I think, 50 plus arrests now, and obviously this is carrying on from Rebellion Week, of course, but this is just the local Trotskyist Marxists who are wanting to cause draw as much attention themselves in Melbourne as possible. And of course they're getting a lot of mainstream media coverage. They are being challenged by Sky News' correspondents and on 3AW, but of course they got the attention they wanted, and as I said, 50 plus have been arrested. We'll see if there's any appropriate punishment for basically aggressing against the people trying to get there. But on with tonight's feature. I'm not sure if all of you have heard of We Are Change. It's an independent, non-partisan news-gathering media organisation. It's comprised of individuals and groups working to expose corruption worldwide. It was founded in 2006 by libertarian Luke Rudkowski. He campaigned for Ron Paul in his 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns. Luke, he has just visited Epstein's private island in the Caribbean. So he's part of the global alternative media push to make sure that Epstein and his Madame Ghislaine Maxwell, their crimes are not forgotten, and there's proper scrutiny, and to track down if the pair of them are still alive, that they can be brought to justice. And Luke also wears a red cap that says "Make taxation theft again." But in 2019, the chapters, We Are Change has chapters all over the world. Anyone can sign up to be a contributor as long as they sign the code of conduct. I became aware of the We Are Change Melbourne YouTube channel only a couple of weeks ago, even though you've been around for a couple of years. So I'll introduce the chapter leader, Jeff O'Toole, and I've also got in the studio Jacqueline Gwynne.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, it's been great to connect because you've nearly got 1,000 subscribers on your channel. You do a talk show similar to what this one is. We interview people who, well, it's not just exposing corruption, it's the elites, the globalists, the abuses and crimes that they consistently get away with.
That's right, we cover a wide range of topics. It's been a tremendous battle with the censorship and shadow banning, but we try and overcome that every day and bring the news that is pertinent to the public in the best way possible.
Now, obviously, you're part of the global We Are Change network.
That's right.
But you're doing citizen journalism here in Melbourne. Obviously, you're part of a global network, but certainly Luke he's not your handler or...
That's right. The chapters operate independently. Everybody can focus on local issues, and there's no one overseeing any of the broadcasts or trying to facilitate what is said or what is covered. So there's that liberty and freedom to be able to cover that without any restrictions. So that's very liberating.
What attracted both of you to sign up to We Are Change, given that you could have just started your own YouTube channel? Like, obviously there's some benefits to being part of a global independent network.
That's right. Well, We Are Change, it does have a lot of prestige, and I was campaigning independently, focusing on activism on many different levels. But being able to bring my experience to this platform has been tremendous. It has been very successful, and there's a bright future with We Are Change, and I encourage more people to get involved and look at starting chapters in their own towns and cities if there's not one already available. So
yes, there's one in
very
Sydney,
productive.
the
Yep.
Gold Coast and Adelaide, so, which is pleasing. And Jacqueline, how did you get involved in We Are Change?
Well, I was interviewed on the show in August, or on my birthday, and I talked about my experience working as a receptionist in a legal Melbourne brothel, and I've been involved in activism. That's what was my entry into activism, speaking out about pornography and the sex trade. I was exposed to a lot of pornography working in that job, and prior to working in that job, I was pro porn and pro sex trade. I thought, well, if a woman chooses to do that, then that's her choice. But I don't think it really is a legitimate choice for women. And I'd never seen pornography before, but it was in my face on big screens in every room that I couldn't escape, and I suffered post-traumatic stress from that. And I saw the way that it impacted the men's behaviour towards the women, and also in my own relationships I saw that, and that's where I started speaking out about 5 years ago, I think. And I've been doing some street art around mainly those two issues, but other issues on the sort of radical feminist platform.
And we'll get to that topic later in the show. Obviously our podcast listeners won't be able to see your shirt, but can you just show the audience and read it out?
It says, "The Big Book of Conspiracy Theories, everything you know is a lie."
Well, conspiracy theories, they used to... they used to be able to dismiss them easily, that you're just wearing the tinfoil hat, but it's becoming more of a just unhinged slur that if you're telling too much truth, then you're a conspiracy theorist.
I mean, they'll say anything to discredit you. I've been called all kinds of things to discredit me. They call radical feminists SWERFs and TERFs, sex worker exclusionary radical feminist, or TERF means trans exclusionary radical feminist, but I've been called all kinds of things, a prude and conspiracy theorist for speaking out. I mean, I don't just speak out on those things, but yeah, a whole range, including 5G. I did a recent interview on that. So.
Well, even if you mention the term globalists or elites, where you're called a conspiracy theorist or even anti-Semitic, that's another slur that they try to put at you.
Yeah, there's many terms and references they use to discredit and ridicule, but it's starting to emerge. A lot of the truth is coming out, and that's what we're going to see. The mainstream media has been brainwashing a lot of the minds, and the propaganda is at an all-time extreme. We've seen it. It's even declassified the Operation Mockingbird. We know the CIA has infiltrated media, trying to push certain agendas on the public, and that's why it's brilliant shows like this, alternate media, getting involved and bringing information to the public that really doesn't see light. So that's very empowering for people, isn't it, Tim?
Yes, definitely. And I know that, well, the traditional media, they're now assisted by big tech, and so if you try to Google something outside of the mainstream, it just spits out the fake news. A perfect example is if you type in Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Ukraine will say this corruption scandal is completely debunked. Believe us, that's what Wikipedia, CNN, Washington Post and New York Times said.
Exactly. And when you type in the search engines looking for legitimate sources of truth, you're always faced with the mainstream narrative, Fox, CNN, and you have to search page after page before you can at least get a remote bit of truth coming through. So it's quite an extreme amount of effort they're putting in to try and hide information that everybody has a right to know.
Obviously, the voice in the wilderness for many, almost 20 years, was Alex Jones. He was just considered a raving conspiracy lunatic. But of course, when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested back in late June on fresh child sex trafficking charges, it's all of the discussion over the past 10 years about, well, not just his crimes, but all of the other pedophile rings was brought into it. And of course, there was that famous meme. I'm not sure if you've seen Alex Jones drinking the champagne, but when you're suddenly the most credible person in the mainstream media, and basically Alex Jones, even though he's banned from YouTube, a lot of YouTubers wanted to interview him. Basically, he was saying what he's been saying for the past 20 years, but it made sense to everybody who just thought he was crazy.
It's a certain level of vindication, and people are starting to realise what he's bringing forward as real important news, and being discredited. I guess he's having the last say in that one, and the last laugh on that one. People that have dismissed his claims, now they can see him in a new light. And looking at Epstein, I mean, committing suicide on suicide watch. I mean, there's so many red flags there. There's supposed to be cameras, security guards, surveillance, and I mean, if the average person doesn't see any suspicion surrounding that event, then there isn't much hope for them. I mean, it's right in the open and it's in your face, isn't it? The cover-up right there.
Yes, well, we've got to keep maintaining the rage. That's the thing. Never forget the mainstream media. They may have moved on. There is still a lot of discussion about the US deep state as well, because obviously Trump, he's still controlled somewhat, but he's been able to blow some of the military-industrial complex and also the media political complex wide open. And obviously he's still doing a lot of the neocons' work in terms of policies with Iran and Saudi Arabia and Israel, but it just gives you a hint of sort of, if you stray just outside the mainstream, they're going to leak and discredit you.
This has been happening for decades. Shadow governments controlling prime ministers and presidents, pulling the strings, and that just goes to show it's all done in secret. A lot of these agendas and these meetings, the plans are put in place, and they just have no choice but to follow with the plans set by the elite. Otherwise, they won't come into power in the first place. It's all very tactical, the way it's organised and orchestrated.
We seem to, a lot of Australians would believe that this is only a US phenomenon. Obviously, Bilderberg Group and Bohemian Grove, that's a secret men's club that's based in the San Francisco area, while Bilderberg, it's a global meeting of the elites. They think that Australia, we're a pretty normal country. Our powerful are very accessible. If you want to meet the minister or prime minister, you can pretty much, if the prime minister's holding a press conference, you can pretty much walk right up if you want to. So we don't sort of think there's this sinister deep state or elites behind the scenes pulling the strings, but I'm sure you would say that we're naive to think that.
Absolutely, and that's very alarming. The idea of Bohemian Grove, you have all the rich elite and the most powerful people gathering together in the redwood forests, and they have a ceremony, the cremation of care, and you can hear Walter Cronkite introducing that, and it's enough to make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, a cackling scream, and it's all very satanic, and it's very unusual. And to think that the most powerful people are getting together and conducting themselves in this manner, it's very alarming, and people should definitely take note of this.
And you can access these groups, like obviously we just talked about Bohemian Grove and Bilderberg. You can, well, obviously it's filtered now, all the search engines, but this is all publicly accessible information.
Absolutely.
Another, I would say, sinister influence that has been blown into public exposure is George Soros and his Open Foundations Society. Pretty much everyone knows about George Soros' web of influence, promoting globalism.
That's right. He took over and became more prominent after Rockefeller passed away, and that's when he became more on the forefront. You started to hear him a lot more, and his agendas, funding certain Antifa and funding other groups to try and disrupt and cause a lot of confusion within a lot of groups that are really meaning well and trying to make a change. He's really trying to infiltrate, and he's done a very good job at that, hasn't he?
Yes, and it's interesting. People don't think about political dynasties. Obviously, the Clintons are the new political dynasty, but the Bush family, they've been around for generations. There's heaps of these dynasties. They just seem to emerge from generation to generation.
100%. It's a lot of these bloodline families. They come into power and they always stay in complete control. And we've seen that all throughout history. That's how they operate, and they control the masses, and they have a script that they stick to. And the common person, to try and wake up and understand the major programming that's taking place, it's tremendously difficult for them when they have to go to work and they've got their own obligations and family to do the research. You know, it takes a tremendous initiative for one to do so. So that's how come they've been able to remain in power for so long, because the average person hasn't been awake. But, you know, with the technology nowadays, if, you know, people apply themselves and they look hard enough, they'll start to see the secrets emerge.
I've always said that, well, the working class, they're just too busy, as their name suggests, working, looking after their families,
That's
resting,
right.
And obviously they tune into the news and television. Well, that's how it used to be, that you just get the five networks, but the cord cutting phenomena as it's known, a lot of people will not watch traditional TV now. There's all of these devices, box devices which are connected to the internet. You can watch, stream things from the internet, or watch on your phone or tablet or whatever. I mean, traditional television now, it's just trashy reality TV, which is completely fake and contrived.
That's what they aim for, to just distract and confuse and just keep people entertained. It's the old bread and circuses motto. They've done it since Rome, and everyone's watching the football and sports, but when it comes down to events and things that matter, they're just not involved as to the level that they should be. When it comes to protests and marches, they're far and few between, and it's a level of distraction that they're all under, and that really keeps people sidetracked, and that's what they hope for.
A few of the interviews you've done with Australian survivors of what is termed satanic ritual abuse, which I will admit now I'm quite sceptical that that sort of real evil exists, because it reminds me of back in the 80s in the United States. I'm not sure if you know, there was the moral panic about daycare, satanic child abuse, and most of the convictions that ended up happening were overturned. And then, of course, there were psychologists and psychiatrists who were revealed to planting hidden memories in mainly women to think that they'd been gang raped and part of these rituals. And so that's why somebody like me sees that, even if the survivor does come across as completely believable, that I have a high degree of skepticism that there's that sort of occult happening in Australia.
Well, see, some people like yourself are skeptical, and the information, all you have to do is look at ancient history. It's been happening. The Mayans, a lot of this, people sacrifice their firstborn. It's not too hard to believe that they would have followed these rituals to today's time. And when you look at it, blood moon, the sacrifices, it's all very prevalent in today's culture, but you just don't hear about it. But you look at Halloween, there's certain dates, times, and the calendars, that's where they draw in this dark energy. And there's a lot of victims stepping forward, survivors of ritual abuse, giving their testimonies, which gives credence to this particular subject matter, and it needs to be brought to light. Some of it's very distressing, and I think a lot of people refuse to look into it. But you look at all these different cultures, and all you have to do is look at history, and it's written in plain text.
Obviously, in Australia, the child sexual abuse, which has affected religious institutions, well, that was laid out in the Royal Commission into institutionalised sexual abuse, which obviously the Catholic Church is the most high profile facilitator and covering up those, but there's also, it's affected most churches as well. And you have done some investigating on that. You went to Hillsong Church, which has been in the news recently because
right.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison, it's leaked that he wanted the current head of Hillsong Church, Brian Houston, to be a guest at the state dinner, which was at the White House, which was vetoed by Trump's team. And obviously Brian Houston's now deceased father, Frank, who was one of the founders of Pentecostalism in Australia, faced in the final years of his life child sexual abuse allegations, and it's reported that he confessed it to his son.
That's exactly right. There's historical sex abuse claims, and it's really upsetting when the people that are supposed to be the most holy, religious and spiritual are the ones committing these heinous acts, particularly against children. And it's unfathomable how people can put their trust in these people. They look for guidance, they're seeking answers, and then it's a complete betrayal. And to think that that's happening, a lot of people are so upset by this and outraged, rightfully so. And I'm glad it's being brought to light. We need more people from the church stepping forward, explaining what they've encountered, any suspicious or unusual activity. It needs to be reported immediately. People shouldn't be able to get away with these crimes. There needs to be information that's directed towards the authorities. There's been so many cover-ups. It's horrendous what's happening, and we really need alternative media to step forward and really highlight this, because the mainstream media has really dropped the ball on it.
Well, when you have almost an entire year level at a school committing suicide because of sexual abuse, that's just an horrific statistic. But obviously the churches is what the mainstream media is focused on, because there's always been an anti-religion bias. But of course, I accept that other institutions have probably been practicing this. Obviously, the most high profile was the BBC. Their most high profile presenter for many years, Jimmy Savile, was abusing hundreds of girls, and the BBC knew about this and covered it up and tried to silence the girls in the United States. One of the college football teams had Jaron Sandusky. He was,
exactly,
I think, an
yeah.
assistant. He was sexually abusing the young male players, and of course this is just what has been discovered, and obviously it leads you to conclude that it's not just a church institution thing. Any type of institution wants to protect its reputation, even at the expense of survivors of sexual abuse.
That's exactly what's happening. So you have these national treasures and icons, high profile figures, and they seem to have total immunity to carry out these vicious crimes. And a lot of them, they have the Order of British Empire, like Jimmy Savile, and you know, you think the MI5, they would have been able to do some background research and delve into some of these behavioural types that they're displaying, and they wouldn't be allowed to have full reign like they do. But they seem to operate and have carte blanche and just get away with committing these atrocities. And it's not until a lot of them die and they're deceased that it's all brought to the mainstream media and the public. It seems like that's how it seems to operate.
And often when one of them is accused of sexual abuse, the elites or the institutions offer a sacrificial lamb. Like, for example, in Hollywood, there's been talk for years of sexual abuse rings, and it was brought that Harvey Weinstein, the famous producer who produced hundreds of films, was one of the worst sexual predators in the United States, and his company, the Weinstein Company, was shut down. And they always seem to say, oh, it's just one bad apple. And Harvey Weinstein, he's facing a rape trial at the moment. But it was interesting, he was spotted at a New York event for young actors, and one of the female comedians there, she got up and basically called him what he was and got booed and kicked out, which is interesting that they're trying to sort of sneak him back in. But it was also the same with Kevin Spacey. He was sacrificial lamb. He hasn't been heard of since. It's not just two people.
Very well said, Tim. That's exactly what's happening. It's a sacrificial lamb. They'll throw one under the bus to save their own. Meanwhile, there's people perpetrating harms against children that are still operating, and they're still at large. While they're, looking at a few vile people like Weinstein, the rape allegations, that's horrendous as well. But you don't seem to hear too much about the ones that are acting and committing pedophilia, and that seems to be what they're doing. They're hiding some of the elite, some of the most powerful people, the conglomerates, the ones behind media, music and advertising. A lot of them are still committing these atrocities, and they haven't been prosecuted or punished whatsoever. That seems to be what's happening. Jacqueline knows a lot about some of the harms and a lot of the horrible, evil, vile predators that are committing these atrocities. And
well, Jacqueline, the reason you've been quite quiet and Jeff doing most of the talking is, as you said to me previously, you're relatively new, but we're getting to your specialty area, which is sexual exploitation. And the mantra is in the 21st century is that you can do whatever you want if it makes you feel good. Do it. We're living in this sexual liberation time, and there shouldn't be any. Well, I still have overall a libertarian view that obviously there is sexual exploitation going, there are sexual dysfunction, disorders and addictions, but I don't think prohibition is the answer. But I don't discount that the sex industry, there are obviously abuses going on there, and that needs to be talked about as well.
Well, I come from a very liberal background also. Like I've been an artist for most of my life, and when I was working in the sex industry as a receptionist, as I was mentioning before, I was studying a Bachelor of Illustration, and I was actually writing a graphic novel and illustrating a book on the sex trade to try and make it look like it was, like it was a good thing for women, to try and make it attractive. And who knows, what got into me to do that. And I was commissioning stories from women that were in the sex trade. And nothing really fell into place. Like, I mean, it was part of my study, and I had to make it work, but it just didn't. Nothing about it worked, and that's when the penny dropped. And I thought, I can't make it look good for women, because it isn't. There is nothing about it that is good. The women that I met, like, I mean, we're all in survival mode. Even as a receptionist, you're just trying to survive make the best of a bad situation and get through the night. Like, you're working night shift, and I think that's what most women in the industry are doing. They're just just trying to survive. And that's when I started speaking out. As soon as I had that realization, first I started speaking out about porn and got a whole lot of backlash and was silenced and abused, and then the next then I started speaking out about prostitution.
Obviously, there's different areas and vocations in the sex industry. Obviously, brothels, which are legal in Victoria, where it's mainly men who come on premises to pay for sex with women. Then there's, it's exploded, the pornography industry, which is, I don't need to lay it out, but it's filming men, women, or men or women in sexual acts and distributing it over the internet. Pretty much the days of the porn videotape are dead. There's also would you include? I'd include stripping in or you call it adult,
even webcamming. It's
adult
all the
entertainment industry. Though the sort of perceived rule of strippers is you look at them, you don't touch them.
Yeah, well, I had no idea about this industry at all until I was in it. And I actually met women who were strippers who actually came into prostitution, and they actually felt safer working in a brothel than they did in a strip club, because it's not just dancing up on the stage. They're in an environment where there's, the men are drunk, they're groping at them, they're yelling abuse at them. And actually, what most people don't realise is the way the women make their money is not through dancing, it's through private dances, which involves prostitution, penetration. So it is. It's the same thing.
Obviously, there is the sex workers union, or association, which is the Scarlet Alliance, and they lobby for that women in the sex industry, they deserve the same OH&S safety as everyone else is entitled to. And obviously a lot of how women's experiences in the sex industry depends on their employers. Like, for example, I won't reveal who told me this, but they believed that they didn't get a fair deal from a stripper one time, and they rang up the place to complain, and the response was, if you keep harassing us, we'll call the police. And so very defensive employer saying, don't harass my workers, performers. And it seems to me, because there's obviously exploiters in every industry. I mean, we're talking in the news at the moment about wage theft. There's a horrific wage theft case where there's a lot of exploitation of foreign workers just for standard labour, where they live in squalor, working 18 hours a day. So this sort of exploitation and extreme is torture is not unique to just sexual exploitation.
I mean, you would think, like, the industry, that prostitution was made legal in Victoria in 1994, and you would think that it would have led to some kind of, regulation of the industry, but it's completely unregulated. Like, where I was, it was marketed as like a high-end, brothel. And, if I work in just a regular job now, And, you know, we've got sort of OH&S sort of guidelines in place, and WorkSafe come in, and, you know they're coming, and they make themselves known. And if they went into a brothel, that, like even this one that was, you know, probably one of the safest ones around, they would shut it down in 5 minutes. And I don't know if you saw the recent video we did about the illegal brothels in Melbourne.
Yes, that was
you can only
quite
imagine
interesting.
the conditions that are in these illegal places.
That's because when something goes from illegal to legal, you think, because it's always, you're able to regulate it then, but you're saying that there's not much.
It's not regulated at all. I never saw any, you know, I had to call the police once. I mean, the police don't come in, like there's no security, nothing. Like I was the receptionist, and I was I wasn't just a receptionist, like I was, you know, I was security, everything. I had to do everything.
I mentioned the Scarlet Alliance. What's your opinion of
not very
them?
high. They're not interested in the well-being of women. They're interested. They're a lobby group for the sex industry, so they're in the interest to keep the women in the industry. Like I've known women who, like I would say that probably most of the women in the industry really don't want to be there. It's just a lack of choice, lack of family support, lack of education that they end up there. But I do know of women who reached out to these organisations, there's a couple of them, and they're not interested in helping them. They don't help them. They only want them to stay in the industry because it's just about money for them.
So they don't. And I'd invite Scarlet Alliance, if they're watching, please reach out, because I'd like to hear their response. They obviously lobby for sex work to be legalised in other jurisdictions as well, because they believe that legalisation is better than an underground trade.
Well, the thing is, like, you would think that since it's been illegal since 1994, it would sort of, I don't know, for example, the stigma. You know, there's a stigma, even as a receptionist. Like, you know, I was made well aware that what I was doing wasn't normal and wasn't right. And I can only imagine what it's like for the women in the industry. What I was saying
in the defence of the Scarlet Alliance, that's one of their goals, is to destigmatise it. So because obviously with the Sydney stabbing spree, the victim of that was a sex worker, and there was a lot of calling out of some media outlets who are being quite crass in detailing overseas trips and that sort of thing, which she was a woman and a human like all of us. Yeah. She didn't deserve to.
Well, I'm not saying that, you know, women don't deserve to be safe, but the very nature of the business is exploitative. You know, I worked 2 night shifts a week, and for a couple of years, and every shift there was an incident of violence and abuse and verbal abuse. That's just the nature of it. Like, women were just, I mean, there was panic alarms in every room, but no one used them. The women just accept that, well, this is just normal, this is just part of the job, this is what I'm getting paid for. I'm getting paid to be sexually harassed and exploited.
And a lot of, you talk about it, for some it is a last resort, but there's also some women who, well, they do make a conscious choice because it is lucrative. You do earn a lot of money in it, and of course you shouldn't have to put up with things like that, but there's still the risk return that...
I mean, I would say that was a myth, that it is lucrative. There is a very small percentage that do legitimately choose it, which would probably account for 1%. And because of all the illegal brothels as well, like, it's taken money away from the legal industry. Like there's estimated that there's 700 illegal places in Victoria and 89 legal ones. So the legal ones, you know, the money's been sort of drained away from the legal industry.
But if you're saying there's no regulation of the legal brothels,
No.
then why is all of these illegal brothels, what's their incentive to operate illegally? Why do they not want to be legal brothels?
Well, because it costs a lot of money. I think it's something like, I mean, I don't know exactly how much it is now, but I know when I was it was 10 years ago when I was in the industry, and it was something like $20,000 a year for a license. So that's why they're,
And where does that money go to? It's
the
just the government?
Yeah.
And you said you'd hope that sort of that goes into what government regulation for it.
No, not that I saw. Not that I saw.
Well, it's sort of like your car registration. It's supposed to go to maintaining the roads, but we know that it's probably not going into some road maintenance fund. Same with the fuel levy. And obviously, things have changed a lot with the internet, and that a lot of like younger men, they wouldn't want to waste their money on paying for sex because, well, obviously they can look at pornography for free most of the time, and a lot of it is what's you call it homemade, or which you just upload it to something like Pornhub or XTube, and it's free for anyone to consume. And there's also the dating apps. That's the sort of the polite way to term them, Tinder and Snapchat. And so it's very easy to get, if you use the term, a free casual sexual encounter where there are no strings attached.
Yeah. I mean, that's another thing that's kind of taking money away from the legal industry too, is like apps like Tinder. I mean, there was nights that I would sort of working at the brothel. There was women that would kind of sit there all night and wouldn't get a job. You know, it's an absolute myth that there's a lot of money in it, and most of the women have an addiction of some kind, whether it's drugs, alcohol, plastic surgery, because the pressure to sort of stay young. They're the women that sort of make the most money, the younger ones. So and also the things, the clothes and the lingerie, that all costs money. Like I don't know very many women, if they exist, that sort of come out better off.
Would you say that this, the technological or technological disruption, as it's called, has changed the clientele of brothels?
Yes. I mean, I saw when I was there the impact of the porn. Like I would never have even considered any of this until I saw it, and I saw what the men were coming in and asking for, and they're asking for exactly what they saw on the screen, which is, and this was just normal, mainstream porn. There was nothing too, kinky or, it's just, but they wanted anal sex, so none of the porn has condoms. It's actually quite aggressive, with like hair pulling and choking, and that's just normal mainstream stuff, and it's probably worse now, but that's what the men were doing.
And that is actually scientifically proved link, that porn addiction, because obviously if with any type of addiction, you need to increase your dose to basically maintain that high. And so that's why you have, if a person's just addicted to normal, like say traditional sexual relations, pornography, then they'll want something that's more unorthodox and then maybe violent as well. There was that famous South Park episode, I think, where Randy says, when you've experienced internet porn, you can't exactly go back to Playboy. And we've seen the Picture magazine, and I think what's the other one, another one of those men's magazines featuring, they're shutting down now. Basically, all magazines are dying.
When you can get your porn for free 24/7,
you don't exactly need to go like in a brown paper bag to get it anymore.
I interviewed a man called John Mueller. I actually got to know him on Twitter. Just sort of, we were sort of both campaigning against porn and the sex trade. And he was a counsellor in a prison, Pennsylvania state prison, and he was counselling men that were sort of high risk sex offenders, serial killers, pedophiles, and he said, like, he worked with them for 11 years, working intimately with these men, and all of them had porn addictions. There wasn't one that didn't. And the pedophiles, see, it's all, as you said, it's an addiction. With every addiction, it escalates. And I interviewed him on We Are Change a few few weeks ago, and it's a really good, insightful interview. And I asked him, you know, do these pedophiles, do they start with sort of normal, you know, vanilla porn with heterosexual women? And he said, yes, they all start there, but because, you know, that's not enough for them to get excited, it escalates, and, you know, they sort of go into more sort of kinky areas, and it ends up in child pornography. And, you know, by then it's just too late. It's creating a generation of psychopaths. It really is. He said that himself.
I just want to insert into this discussion that sexual relations in themselves are not bad. You can have a healthy sex life, and of course there's nothing wrong with, if you're walking down the main street, see someone attractive, just thinking to yourself, yeah, they, you know, look really pretty, and
But who thinks like that anymore? Like, everyone's got, you know,
it's in moderation, like everything. Like, for example, having alcohol, like you can obviously like go to maybe out Friday or Saturday night, or to a party, just have a few drinks, but obviously having a slab of beer or a bottle of vodka every night, that's not healthy for you as well. Vice is, like, we can enjoy vices, it's just that we've got to make sure that we consume them in moderation. Even like McDonald's, like obviously there was it Morgan Spurlock, he had the McDonald's for a month, and so that's I think the main message, that you've got to, obviously we want to enjoy things. There's no fun in being a wowser all of the time, but obviously moderation is healthy.
Yeah.
And that seems to be what's happening. And you see a lot of people, their mind is in the gutter, and it's the number one search topic is pornography. You know, they're not trying to educate themselves. They're not trying to look at fitness strategies. It seems like the level of perversion is very extreme, and that's something that, you know, society has to overcome, and we need to address these issues, because there's a level of shame, I'm sure, that's attached with a lot of people's addictions, and the stigma that goes along with it. So to have a healthy lifestyle, I think, is fundamental, and it's good to address these issues, Tim.
And even though this is something that technology and the internet has created, it's also providing the solution as well. Obviously, NoFap, which is obviously helps assist, well, mainly men, to stop masturbating to pornography, and like it explains all the health benefits to such a thing. That's a movement that's growing in popularity, because men, they want to basically enjoy what was normal sexual relations. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the Proud Boys, the fraternal men's.
Oh yeah, I don't know too much about them. But
Okay,
I know
well they have
movement.
what's termed a no wanks rule.
Oh, okay.
That you're not allowed to, well, you're allowed to masturbate once per month. This video is going to get demonetized now, but it's the reason there's that rule is to encourage the men to go out and meet women, pursue healthy relationships, and of course in the end marriage and families with women, which is, well, it's quite refreshing that there's an actual new organisation that advocates that.
Yeah. And it's actually, I really can't talk much about that, because I don't know. I know about the NoFap.
Yeah, you can talk about that.
I don't. Yeah, it's not really my. I don't know much about it. I'm sorry. I think it's really good, and that's all I can sort of offer on that at the moment.
It comes down to self-discipline, doesn't it? And if more people exercise that willpower, then hopefully their natural relationships will blossom, and they won't be lured astray with any pornographic images or houses of ill repute, brothels or strip clubs. Hopefully people can find love in an innocent way, and I think overall that's what people want.
I do think of something I could add to that. I mean, I can only speak about my experience as a woman. Just this kind of this hypersexualization of our culture. That's just, you know, our sexuality has just been absolutely hijacked. We don't. I remember as a teenager, my mum didn't let me buy these magazines, but there was, you know, Cosmopolitan and Clio and...
Yes, Clio shut down now.
Yeah, good. But just the whole thing about masturbation, like, you know, I never even thought about that stuff when I was, you know, 13. But you're made to feel like, you know, if you're not doing that, then you're not normal.
Well, I actually didn't know what it was until my school taught me.
Yeah,
which
your school
says a
taught
lot.
you. Yeah, it's weird.
So it's because it's sort of, well, there's a lot of these, what is it, sexologists now who say that, well, looking at porn and masturbating regularly is healthy. There's a lot of that filtering into the education system as well.
Yeah.
And obviously that's fed into the Safe Schools program as well. Now, you describe yourself as a radical feminist, so obviously I want to talk about the transgender phenomena, because what's your view on trans women?
Well, what radical feminists have issue with, we're not, you know, we're sort of silenced as being transphobic, but that's not it at all. It's about, you know, we're sort of working towards creating safe environments for women, and you know, trans women, they're men, and they're sort of coming into women's spaces, and we're missing out on opportunities that were there for women, like women's sport, for instance. You know, these men, like, and it's not sort of working in the opposite way. There aren't sort of trans men or women going into men's sport. It's only the trans women going into women's sport, and it's really not fair.
I'd say sport is obviously because it's
not.
physical, and even if a trans woman is able to get the estrogen levels up, they've still, some cases, 15, 20, 25 years growing as a male, so you can never really... And it used to be actually the accepted thing that if you're going to transition and you had a sports career, that it was probably going to affect that, but obviously that's a lot of, because trans people have been around for 50, 75 years, but it's only sort of the last decade that the sort of more radical ones have taken over.
When I was at school, like I was at school in the 80s and 90s, there were no trans people. Gender dysphoria didn't exist. It's just, it's a social contagion, and it's been you know, socially constructed, and sort of there's real agenda being pushed at the moment, and it has a pedophilic agenda. It benefits and enables pedophiles, and I've been sort of researching the Safe Schools program, and looked at what's being taught to kids in schools. And kids are being exposed. I mean, I know parents whose kids were exposed to anal sex porn under the, you know, the guise of anti-bullying.
Some of those cases. So yeah, and the thing today also is that parents, they basically give their children over to the school and raise my child. And the reason why the Safe Schools program doesn't actually get much scrutiny is because the administrators, they're able to identify that it's only one or two vocal parents, and so they say to the other parents, oh, don't listen to them, they're kooky, and trust us.
I mean, I've worked as a teacher for a long time, and I also went to I went through the state school system, and like my high school in Sydney, we had so many pedophiles there. They don't need any encouragement, but this Safe Schools program is encouraging pedophiles, like, you know, showing children pornography, and yeah.
And you also have the drag queens now, which used to be like adult entertainers reading to children, and then there's sort of those images that I'm not going to repeat them, but you know what I'm talking about, of children with embracing the drag queens, which is it's really and it's sort of, when you first sort of hear about that, you sort of think, oh, as if like that's really happening, that's you know, that's an exaggeration. And that was sort of the same with the Safe Schools program. Oh, it doesn't teach that, but of course you investigate it, and then
it does. They're trying to hide it. Like there's links in the program to porn, the sex trade, and they're sort of, kids are sort of, they're encouraging them to reenact these sexualized scenarios in school.
That's the Respectful Relationships program, which is a separate one, which is supposed to be what's anti-domestic violence, which sort of seems weird that you sort of talk about something so explicit in that.
They're a cover for something else. Like, I really encourage parents to find out, what their kids are being taught, and
we've got a bit of time left, so I want to talk about, obviously, dealing with government and police authorities. If you really need to deal with them for something major, your life can turn into hell. Like, for example, accessing the MyGov website, that it's a horrible website. It fails all of the time, and this is why I always say to people, try not to be dependent on the government, because they'll make your life hell. You've done a bit of work on Centrelink with the robo debt, and then of course they allow people to get away with frauds, but if you're legitimately have a disability which can't work, then they put up obstacles, and it just is a nightmare.
That's exactly what we're seeing right now. It's like MyGov and the whole website was designed to fail. That's how they constructed it. People are forced into poverty situations. We see the cashless welfare card being distributed now. People can't take advantage of bargains. They're placed on a card where they have limited access, and they're being deprived of opportunities and treated like second-class citizens, which is certainly not fair. And people don't have a chance now, and it makes it harder for them to gain employment and live a full lifestyle. People are really being punished where they deserve help, and they need opportunities given to them. They shouldn't be restricted in access for anything like that. So, we've seen it rolled out in Bundaberg and other areas, and it hasn't helped whatsoever. If people want to access drugs and alcohol, they're going to find a way of doing that, and the crime rate is actually going to increase. So it's been very detrimental, and to these Indu cards, to actually offer them, it's at a higher cost to the taxpayer.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Have they actually done a cost-benefit analysis of these cashless welfare cards and robo-debt? Because they have to contract out to these firms to do it, and there's all this corporate welfare that's been given out, these grants to all of these various community organisations, which is just surprised at who gets government funding. And it seems like the federal government, they're still living in, say, 1990s current affair, where them exposing dole bludgers and fraudsters, that's the whole system.
And that's exactly what's happening. It's very detrimental to people's livelihood, and the way it's being rolled out, it's not ethical whatsoever. And people are going to be forced into a depression over this type of thing. They've got it hard enough trying to access gainful employment. They don't need this card put on top of them.
And they also want to drug test, they're introducing random drug tests of welfare recipients. And you just mentioned before that a lot of the sex workers, they had addictions as well. And given how low Newstart is, it's...
I think that this whole situation, it's being engineered. It's all by design. But women are sort of being funneled through to the sex industry.
Are you really going to be able to afford a drug addiction on Newstart? That's what I...
Well, a lot of the women don't start with a drug addiction. Like, I saw a lot of women sort of come into the industry, and they were young, healthy, happy, and within 2 weeks, their drug addiction just spiraled out of control. Like, I saw one girl who was 22. This is one example, and within 2 weeks she was addicted to ice and picking at her face, and just it's because the work it's painful. It takes a very it's painful sort of having. I won't go into too much detail, but you can just imagine if you're having sex with 10 men a night. They pay for their hour. They want to get their money's worth. So it's painful. So they take drugs to numb the pain.
And of course, these people are forced on these cashless welfare cards, drug tested, or have the robo-debt. They can't afford lobbyists like some of the big corporations and other special interest groups to lobby government on their behalf. That's another problem area of government, that the people that get in their ear are not the ordinary people.
Yes, and that robo-debt, that's shocking too. A lot of people are forced into bankruptcy, and a lot of these debts aren't even warranted. You know, it's very unlawful the way they're rolling that out, trying to hit people and target them financially. A lot of them were actually doing the right thing, but because of the bank records, it dates so far back, they can't even prove that they were doing the right thing, and they've been targeted very unfairly. And when they put these restrictions on people and place debts, that's where they're going to look at criminal activity to try and gain financials. They're going to look at prostitution, drug dealing, and other levels of crime, armed robberies, because they need to keep a roof over their head. So this is going to be catastrophic for society.
Obviously, we've talked about the sex industry, which is somewhat legal. I'm interested in your views on drug prohibition as well, because if you're forced into, like, for example, like if you're a drug addict or forced to, because they don't become drug dealers because they're bad people, that's sometimes the only way that they can make money. What's your view on drug prohibition?
Well, people need health opportunities, and they need support and care. They shouldn't be punished. They shouldn't be put in front of a court and prosecuted and put in jail because it's a non-violent crime. If somebody has an addiction, they should be looked after and provided ample opportunities. They shouldn't be discriminated against. They shouldn't have their employment affected. Once they get a conviction, it's going to be harder to gain employment. It's going to affect their reputation, and it's going to hit them on many different levels. They shouldn't be judged, persecuted, or isolated from communities, because that's where a lot of the addictions stem from, because it originates from these type of problems. And, you know, they shouldn't be treated unfairly. They deserve help, not punishment, Tim.
Jacqueline?
That's not really my area of expertise, so
You don't have...
I won't comment. I have got some views, but yeah, I'm not an expert enough on that.
Okay, fair enough. Now, obviously, you've also interviewed people, because when there's disputes between, say, partners or or just between individuals, the state sometimes takes a side. They're supposed to be, well, the judiciary authority is supposed to be independent, but especially in family breakups, I mean, there's going to be inquiry into the family law system, the AVO system. That's also an area which is massively taken advantage of, and there's not really much scrutiny on there. And of course, it's not the bureaucrats' intention most of the time, because they're bogged down in so much work. I mean, you just have to look at child protection. The reason why so many children are left at risk is because they're just overworked. They've got an overworked caseload. Again, I'd rather see taxpayer funds go into something like that rather than community grants to arts centres or even sports club. That we can easily re-divert funds. We don't need to tax and spend more.
Exactly right. And when the public make these submissions to council and government, it seems like it falls on deaf ears, and they just designate the funds to whatever they're going to do anyway. They take votes and polls, and it seems like everything is just swept away and dismissed, and it feels like the people don't have a say. And, you know, social media, people voice their opinions, but the agendas are implemented, and all the unlawful systems just seem to flourish, and people don't seem to have a say, so that seems to be an issue as well.
Now, obviously, we talked briefly about the shadow banning of independent media, and obviously Luke Rudkowski, he's not immune to it. He's just lucky that he's built up this following before all this big tech censorship took place, and he's very proactive around the world. As I mentioned, he went to Epstein Island with Jeff Barwick, who runs the Dollar Vigilante. He was there as well, so was Dan Dix of Press for Truth. Another friend in their network is Josh Sigurdsson of World Alternate Media, and I only discovered all these people in the past year, and I'm supposed to be an alternative independent media, and you can see how my access to who's actually doing work is limited, and it's really ramped up there the past few years. Like, I'm actually noticing that with some of my streams and videos, I'm actually getting more likes than views. How does that work?
That's exactly right.
Unless YouTube is suppressing the views.
That's a clear indication of manipulation, isn't it, Tim? And there are people and organisations that you just mentioned, they're doing exceptional work and they deserve to be rewarded, not demonetised and not shadow banned or censored. These people should be looked at as the pillars of society, holding everything up and keeping the level of truth in order, and making sure that everything runs on a level playing field. But no, they're being treated like criminals, and it's really unfair, isn't it? Their voice is being suppressed when it should be amplified.
You are currently still reliant on the big tech to get your message out. There's the YouTube channel, and you have a Facebook group as well. Do you have plans to break free, use other, say, neutral, or where there's no chance of you being deplatformed? You've explored other, like, obviously there's BitChute, there's Gab.com, Gab has basically been able to outthought the deplatformers all the way. They pretty much have their own everything, their own ISP, servers, payment processor. They've thwarted them. Andrew Tauber's pretty much a genius. So there is a way to fight back. It's not easy. You do take a bit of a hit. But
That's right.
I think we all sort of accept that they're going to come for us one day.
And a lot of these other platforms, there's not a satisfactory audience over there. The numbers just aren't there.
Yeah, not yet.
So it's a bit of a last resort, but it's also good to have a strategy in place, a plan B, if you will. If everything comes short, because our Facebook page, We Are Change, that's shadow banned, censored. You type that in, people can't even find it. It has to be recommended, and it's very frustrating when you're doing excellent work, but you're just not getting the results that you so rightfully deserve.
I can contribute something to that. I've been banned on Facebook about 7 times for a month each time for speaking the truth, mainly about porn, sex trade, pedophilia.
Was it because you were saying explicit things in their view?
No.
Or was it?
No, like, the first thing I got banned for a month for was men who watch porn have no respect for women. That's it. That's it.
I mean, in my opinion, that's a sweeping statement, but it's not it's not a Facebook jail offence.
Yeah,
in my
I mean,
view.
I'm speaking out about pages on Facebook. There's one called Legalise Pedophilia. There's another one called Choking Prostitutes. They're still allowed to exist, but
Yeah, well, Facebook. I mean, even after, like, there was a lot of scrutiny post the Christchurch massacre, but they've been streaming Islamic terrorism and child abuse for years, but they still ban people for minor things, or you said a non-politically correct word.
Well, I believe that Facebook are actually profiting from porn and sex trafficking. That's why they're silencing people like me. Like, I was going to mention, I was banned 7 times from Facebook for a month each time. I've got another platform called The Untamable Shrews, which is a radical feminist street art movement. And I'm the founder of that. It's based in Melbourne, but there's women all around the world. And I had 5,000 followers on Twitter, and it was just banned, just for speaking the truth. And so that's why I started doing street art, because I was silenced all the time, and just doing stickers and graffiti and things like sort of putting letterbox drops into just leafleting. I don't know, just putting information into library books and whatever we could think of. We'd
And also now the payment processors, they're getting on the deplatforming movement. First it was PayPal, and also Patreon, and then of course MasterCard and Visa. And now we have, in Australia, a lot of prominent patriot nationalist activists there getting their personal bank accounts shut down by the commercial banks like Westpac and ANZ, which you need a bank account to just buy groceries. I mean, it's so ludicrous. Oh, sorry, your card's declined because you have the incorrect views. And you'll probably find this interesting, that there's a lot of outrage about sex workers getting, or sex-related industry companies are being deplatformed from the banks, but these patriot activists who would by days are labourers and builders, there's no outrage at all that they're getting their accounts shut down. We're one of the only media here at the Unshackled that's reported it.
Wow. Compliments to that. Full credit for your work, Tim, doing that.
Yes, but we can only get the word out to so many people, and this is the thing. The news, they're very. This is why I think the Your Right to Know campaign is so ridiculous. I call it the Your Right to Know What We Want to Tell You campaign. I mean, they would not think that the public have a right to know what issues are of concern to you. I mean, it's. The mainstream media still want to be the gatekeepers, that it's only news if we publish it. Of course, there's the, as I talked about, the protection rackets they run for the politicians. I mean, how has Barnaby Joyce's affair been able to kept secret for 6 months, and that he'd impregnated his media advisor? It was only one rogue mainstream media journalist in Sherry Markson that broke that, who went against the protection racket, which gives you an insight of sort of what else they're hiding. So mainstream media is very selective in what they report.
Absolutely. It shows the level of control that the government has over mainstream media, doesn't it? And how effective they are at broadcasting selective news stories, articles and pieces.
I mean, they've got a corporate agenda, and if you speak out about that corporate agenda, then you're silenced.
And I will just add about the bank deplatforming. It's so much for consumer rights that says we have the right to shut down your bank account and we're not going to tell you the reason. How is that? How are you being treated just as a consumer? And of course, terms and conditions, they're 10 to 50 pages long. No one reads them.
That's right. It's very Orwellian, isn't it? The control system's put in place. It's very hard to escape these. You know, if you've got a viewpoint that is counteractive to the mainstream narrative, it makes it very difficult for one to live a full life and escape this discrimination.
Well, I've enjoyed our discussion tonight, even though we sort of had differences of opinion on some points. I think that it was a
You'll come
good...
around. Just kidding.
But I hope that the audience are watching this tonight because they try to paint, or as they term, conspiracy theorists as crackpots, but people who are watching this will know that you're both well-reasoned, level-headed people, and so I think it's definitely, I would advise everybody to go and subscribe to the We Are Change Melbourne channel, and I definitely like to keep in contact with you, maybe have you on again sometime soon, maybe do some collaboration, because you're based here in Melbourne, you're quite a bit of a distance away. There's that CBD and freeway that gets clogged around peak hour, which is, well, that's a whole other story. But yeah, definitely I'll make sure our audience, a few people in the chat said they've already gone and subscribed to your channel, so hopefully a few more people go and see it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear on the WilmsFront production. Very grateful, and hopefully the information has reached the people, and continued success with all you're doing, and I look forward to coming on the program once again in the not too distant future.
And of course, I advise all of our viewers now to go over to Deavel Tran's YouTube channel for her weekly live stream. She's got Samuel Lee as her guest, who is a rogue accountant who has been criticised in the media because he wants the income tax abolished, which I think everyone's just perplexed that an accountant doesn't want to do taxes, make themselves sort of less work for them. So that should be an interesting one. And tomorrow night is, of course, the Uncockables, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the Uncockables YouTube channel, the Alt Media Super Show, which is, of course, produced by the Unshackled, the XYZ, and the Rational Arise. There's a lot for us to digest. We're probably going to be focusing this week on exposing a lot of the conservatives, as we like to call them, because Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, he's been having a week from hell, not from the left, but his own side calling him out. So stay tuned for that, and I'll be back for WilmsFront Friday at 7 p.m. Melbourne time. I've got Bitcoin expert Stephen Livara on, because I used to consider just Bitcoin just sort of a nerdy, geeky thing, but it's free speech currency. So as the expression goes, I might have mocked it back then, but who's mocking who now? So Stephen is going to do just back to basics Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, because he's now hosting what's one of the best cryptocurrency podcasts in the world. He's just based here in Sydney, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Of course, you can check out the archive of episodes at timwilms.com, where you can also subscribe to the podcast version on Apple, Spotify, and your other favorite podcasting platforms. And of course, please visit theunshackled.net on a regular basis to check out our commentary and news that's been still published on a regular basis. My colleague Steele Archer, his Detonation program on its dedicated YouTube channel, broadcasts most weekday mornings Melbourne time. That of course is the home of transhumanism. So for your morning digest, make sure you tune into that. Please follow me on social media. Of course, I still am on facebook.com/WilmsFront, twitter.com/WilmsFront, but I also am on gab.com/TimWilms and minds.com/TimWilms. All right, that is it for tonight. And of course, I should also remind that it's the end of the month, which is the best time to sign up as a financial supporter of The Unshackled, which helps the WilmsFront production. So of course, we are still on patreon.com/theunshackled and subscribestar.com/theunshackled. We have our web membership program at theunshackled.net/membership, and of course theunshackled.net/donate, and paypal.me/theunshackled for a one-off contribution. And of course, WilmsFront will eventually be on rationalrise.tv, the free speech self-hosted video website set up by James Fox Higgins of the Rational Rise. I don't think I have any more reminders. So enjoy Dear Beltran's live stream if you're a live viewer, and I will see a lot of you tomorrow night, but I'll be back for WilmsFront Friday night. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next show.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting theunshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.